quick time events, or QTEs for short. A way for developers to try and make certain cutscenes interactable when they can't fully express what they want to do in the cutscene and gameplay, or there are some games that'll just throw in QTE prompts to pretty much be like a heads up, pay attention kind of thing into their gameplay. Some games do try to find unique ways of using QTEs, and some games are specifically built around the entire mechanic. Let me explain. I obviously gotta go with the big example of QTE spreading, being games like Resident Evil 4 and Shenmue, where those games use QTEs a lot, especially Shenmue, although a lot of people, do see a lot of people cite it surprisingly, despite it being a big proponent for QTEs. Instead, that goes to Resident Evil 4 that people cite because of how often it's used in gameplay, where it be used to dodge attacks, or be used for cutscenes in order to pretty much avoid getting a game over. And while I do like the fact that it means I have unique game over screens for these events, maybe fail them, it does also mean that, you know, it's kind of one of those things that people are generally annoyed by QTEs because of the fact that it feels like they just come out of nowhere, which, yeah, that has the whole point. They're called quick time events, think fast. But also feel like, you know, they prefer it if the game could properly highlight with the gameplay that's what they're trying to do, rather than just using QTEs instead. So it's one of those things that's like, I get the frustration of why people don't like them. Me also being a person that also has issues with QTEs, but there are certain uses where I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool. A cool way of doing QTEs would probably be the Naruto Storm games, where those QTEs will generally have you follow the button inputs that you use for gameplay, so the QTEs being brought on screen feel more natural, and it just basically feels like ideally what QTE should be, having to use this cutscene to get across this different kind of gameplay style, but using the controls you're familiar with, because since they're arena fighting games, they can't do some of the stuff that cutscenes are trying to convey that would border onto a different genre. So that the QTEs have you doing stuff that you would do in normal gameplay, which is freaking cool and amazing way of doing it, and it is, from what I've seen, underappreciated. I know fans of the game enjoy it, but more people should enjoy how the Storm games do it. There are also some freaking games by really got Gotoku Studios that do try and do that. A lot of times is a random button you have to push. But I remember specifically one instance at Crystar North Star Lost Paradise, where there was a boss fight, I believe against Ral, that required you to hit the R2 button in order to go into your freaking powered up state. Which made sense, because that was the actual button you pushed in order to do that in gameplay. But it also felt unnatural because that's the only time in the game a QT ever used that button. Even though it was a correct button to use, it felt random as hell because of that, because every other QTE generally uses the face buttons. Some games fully use QTEs to get all action across, something like recently reviewed D4 Dark Dreams Don't Die, where the major action moments use QTEs in order to get the action across, but the game would have the button prompt on the bottom to show you when it was coming up so you can prepare for it. So it's still a think fast, but you do have some warning. You also have stuff like the Telltale Walking Dead series, which from season 2 onward pretty much primarily use QTEs for their action segments, and that one generally gives you plenty of time to react. Now, despite being called quick time events, many games have QTEs that give you a generous amount of time to react, or some games give you the option to have them automatically be done if you just don't want to do them, or might not have the reaction speed to do them. So there are some games that do have options like that. I remember typically had a friend play Resident Evil 5 with me, and he was not used to QTEs actually being a think fast, so RE5's QTEs caught him off guard with how little time he had to react. So there is that where, since those games try to add more pressure with their QTEs, it's the epitome of think fast, react fast, push the button or get a game over, but generally don't punish you that much for failing, so there is also that benefit where you don't lose a lot because of it. I mentioned earlier, but fail animations is something I love when games and QTEs do. Seeing what kind of fail scenario developers can come up with. Sometimes the fail scenario isn't that great, sometimes enjoyable to watch, and sometimes the fail is downright comedic, And I love that kind of stuff when games have fail reactions for the whole entire thing. It's a fun bonus thing to do. And not to mention, when they add that, because there are many games that just don't have a fail state, like the game will just keep going forward as if you pushed it. You may not get the full benefit of it, but sometimes games don't even require you to actually even push the button. It just does it more for immersion's sake, but in reality, they don't have a fail state, so the game will keep going. One big moment I know, which is technically spoilers, so I'll give a spoiler warning right now for Final Fantasy 15. You have been warned, alright? Okay, warning issued for Final Fantasy 15. Okay, we're good? Alright. The Leviathan boss fight in the second segment is basically the epitome of you just pushing one button constantly. Even the QTE segment is still just you pressing one button in order to keep doing the fight. But so those QTEs in that fight don't even require the player to push the button. It'll just progress anyway, which is one of those things that I guess ideally for a developer, a player will really find out. But when a player finds out, it can be demotivating to find out that their effort was pointless, or be upset the developer never actually added in a fail state for it, so there's no unique animation of the character dying or losing or whatever. So that one's a gripe that I just mentioned when there is a fail animation.
Tap, 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 tap. Take a break from tapping for a bit. And it didn't matter. It's like they don't even play video games, whoever made this. In case you didn't know, this hand didn't move towards the controller.
Yeah,
I did not
was
press
that different
circle.
for you guys?
That's the big example is Dead by Daylight, which does add QTEs for the survivors, primarily when they do generators, in order to keep them from just holding down one button to fix them. Although being called QTEs, they're instead called skill checks. That is the most Canadian way to refer to a QTE I've ever heard in my life. But it is there to hold their attention to pretty much keep this going, and also if they mess up, it means that the punishment of the killer, when that generator just exploded, and alerting them. So there is a reason to keep them, this is to keep them paying attention, keep them going, and there are some persons that decide to strike that do require you to perfectly time a QTE in order to pretty much actually use it. Or when the killer picks you up, originally it was just stuff like, oh, just mash the button, or QTEs that mash the button, but instead changed it to all be a timing based thing, which, while it's simple execution, it is more complicated and also a lot less controller destroying than mash the button rapidly, stuff like that. Especially when I see old DVD, we had to mash the button in order to struggle on hook. And I remember seeing that one of the reasons why I just didn't want to play DVD, being like, that's always going to be annoying very fast to constantly mash the button. Another way I've seen QTEs used is also for stuff like turn-based RPGs, where they'll have time input mechanics, which is like Dragoon, where they typically have a white box in the center telling you exactly when to hit the button, and even when to swap buttons to, let's say, circle, if it's about to counter, but it's always the same formation each time. Even something like time inputs for a Super Mario RPG are still a QTE of some form, even if some people don't associate it with being QTE. It still is, and they're done in ways that are less intrusive, something like Resident Evil 4, where it can just basically have you paying attention more to button prompts than what's actually happening on screen, which is the big complaint people have for QTEs. The fact that for many games, the way they're done takes all attention away from the game itself for the player to pay attention for a potential button, which some people, like I said, some people like that because, like, oh, it keeps people more engrossed. Other people feel like it makes it so you're not paying attention to the game itself at that point. You're just waiting to see one button will be pushed. So like a whole entire joke thing of people who put a controller down during a cutscene because it's no longer about gameplay, it's about just watching a scene happening. So introducing a button prompt that gets them killed, they don't push it, kind of feel like a dick move, but it is freaking hilarious when people have that moment. It is always funny, but it's a frustration that honestly I agree with. Like, yeah, you're not paying attention to the game itself, You're paying attention, you're not paying attention to the cutscene, you're paying attention to what random thing would a game have me do now that is unrelated to any sort of control scheme the game had before. This one is a very specific pet peeve for me. It's not even the game's fault, but Lost Judgment included QTE combos to do during certain boss fight segments, which are already bad because the symbols don't look that big on an actual TV, but the issue is not with the game, but when Sony changed the DualSense face buttons to all be the same color, making trying to tell which buttons which from a glance way more complicated, especially when the icons look small on actual TV, and this is my big pet peeve because that just pissed me off, and I don't know why Sony would decide all the face buttons to be the same color all of a sudden. Yes, they're different shapes when they're all the same color, it's to blend into each other when they try to put the button prompt on a screen, and I hate that. Once again, it's a both combination of telling out the game's fault, more so Sony's fault for the redesign of DualSense, but I'm counting it because it's my pet peeve. So that's what I want to mention when it comes to QTEs, just different forms of them. And like I said, people generally don't like them because they feel intrusive and unnatural. But there are games like I mentioned, like Naruto Storm series, which can make them feel natural, or games that are specifically designed where the whole gameplay revolves around doing QTEs. So by that logic, it feels natural because that's all you're doing throughout the game. Especially something in horror games, like to take advantage of that, like Supermassive Games, I believe, like something Until Dawn, where having the weapon control scheme that requires fast reaction when the player's already feeling adrenaline intense does add more into the horror and fear in the game as well. So there are different ways of doing it. That's all I gotta say. Alright then, go out there, play games that have QTEs or don't have QTEs, or some games that have the ability to just turn on the things that do QTEs for you if you prefer. There are options out there. Alrighty then, good day.